watching the clock click down to the final seconds, and he literally finishes on the last second of his 15 minutes. I'm impressed. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for your time, and also thank you especially to the organizers, CWI, who puts together these incredibly complex conferences. And I don't think they get enough credit considering how many people they're bringing from how many different countries to put them together all in one place at one time. So thanks very much to CWI. I just really appreciate it. First of all, let me just describe the industry. Many of you have seen my presentations before, but this is just a way of thinking about the stability operations industry. We kind of break it down into 4 general categories. The first one is logistics and support category, and those are the companies that essentially are doing jobs that would be fairly normal in a peaceful environment, but when you do them in a complex environment, a war zone or a disaster zone, it requires special skills. But these would include the construction industry, logistics, medical services, things like that. That's about 90, well, let's say 80% of our industry is really that first column there. It's the one that has the most to do with reconstruction and development, but not everything. The second category there is the private security companies. They're hired to protect a person, place, or thing. Obviously, they're critical in the kind of environment that these companies face in Afghanistan. And obviously, there's some issues there going on with the APPF, the Afghan Public Protection Force, and the future of providing security for the development process. The third sector there is the security sector reform and development sector. And these are the companies that are helping to provide a long-term solution to any sort of environment similar to Afghanistan. So in Kosovo, it includes training the police or training the military, the border guards, training up legal systems and so on. But these are companies that are helping to develop the society, to develop civil society, and create sort of a long-term process there. And finally, the industry support organizations. These are simply companies within our industry that support other companies within the industry with services such as legal services, public relations and marketing, and also human resource companies that help with the vetting of personnel. And I'll talk a bit more about that later, because that's an important one. Security is 90% of the solution, but only 10% of the problem. And this is an interesting thing to say, but essentially what it means is that until you have security, it's really difficult to do anything else. And so obviously this is, when you're putting together a puzzle like Afghanistan, the first step is let's make sure we have some way of ensuring that there's security so that the development can go on, the construction, the civil society development, people can do other things and simply keep themselves alive. I'm going to go through some industry realities, and then I'm going to go through some government realities that we're facing in Afghanistan. We're in an unfortunate era when it comes to contracting. It's what I call an era of vengeance contract management. It means that essentially there's no overt support for private contractors in the public sphere. Effective and efficient contracting is undermined by a sense of hostility among many policymakers. This idea that the contractors can only be bad, and it means that the policies are designed in a way that essentially emphasizes finding flaws in the contracting and not looking towards a successful mission. And this is becoming a big problem for our industry. For government contractors, especially those working for the US government, there's a sense of being the fall guy, which is to say, you're not allowed to criticize your client. When the biggest client in the world makes a mistake and tells you to do something that's silly, the last thing you want to do is go to the New York Times and say we're being told to do something silly. It means that you just do it, and ultimately when the blame comes down, you simply say nothing or accept the blame. That's just sort of the reality of working for the government. Okay, that's always been like that, and that's something that the companies have to deal with. But it's not particularly conducive to good contracting. Quality proposals are often undermined by a focus on cost. The LPTA, lowest price technically acceptable. There's a reason that you don't want to pay too much money for a contract, but when you're cutting out the quality aspect, it's problematic. And unfortunately for our industry, when you have companies that are making sure they're following all the FAR regulations and spending the money to make sure they're doing things properly, and then they're losing contracts on very tiny margins to companies that are of inferior quality, that's problematic. Primary Afghan government difficulties are actually not the compliance aspect, but the clarity. There's a lot of policies from the Afghan government that we have a problem discerning exactly what they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to be carried out, and then we get mixed messages from different Afghan officials as to how they should be done. Something we would love to see is standardization, and basically just clarity. What do we need to do? What taxes are appropriate? Are we getting receipts for the taxes? How is this done and done the same way each time? Again, it's not the rules that are the problem, it's defining them and telling and understanding what they are. As we say, good regulation and good oversight are good for good companies. If you want to reward the better companies in our industry, that have good oversight, make sure that the actors, the companies that are not following the rules are the ones that are being penalized, and the ones that are carefully following the rules are the ones that win the new contracts. But there are government realities that our industry has to understand as well. Number one of them is the number of personnel that are actually doing the oversight and procurement of these contracts. And you can have the best procurement officer in the world, but if you completely overload them with too many contracts to oversee and too many details, there's no way they're going to be able to keep up. And in addition, companies are often guilty of burdening the contract officers with numerous requests and problems that could perhaps be handled otherwise. We are seeing an increase in the numbers, at least from the U.S. side, of contracting officers and so on, but that does take time and for them to become experienced and professional officers. I think many people in the U.S. government that I've talked to in the contracting field are finding that focusing on the policy goals is not being rewarded. Instead, what's being rewarded is finding the flaws in the system. Again, this is a problem. Why are we in Afghanistan as a U.S. For the U.S., what are we trying to achieve there? And if we're simply trying to achieve the penalization of contractors that are making mistakes, we're doing a good job. If we're trying to achieve a strong and independent Afghanistan, I think we're perhaps having some problems. Increasingly, we're also seeing that the contract officers are being hamstrung on contracting tools. We see a lot of micromanaging now coming from the U.S. Congress on exactly how contracting should be done. There is a lot of history and a lot of realities about why we do contracting, why the government does contracting in certain ways, and when the U.S. Congress steps in every few months and comes up with a new rule or new restriction on the contracting community, it makes it harder for them to do their job, and it also makes it tougher on our industry. And also we see agents operating at the whim of policymakers. Again, you have long-term policies and decisions that are being made and then being undercut, again, by micromanaging we see coming down from the upper level, and that is problematic. Ultimately, we need a greater need for cooperation and not confrontation. Going back to my days as an academic and doing research in the field in Africa, where there were U.S. government policies supporting peacekeeping operations in various places, one thing that I was really impressed with was a partnership that was there between the U.S. government and the contractors they were using to carry out the mission. And the focus was on the mission. And that's really important. It's something we've kind of lost. The support that I see in Washington, in the U.S. Congress for the mission in Afghanistan is disappearing. There's open disagreement with the Afghan government inside Congress. There's many points of friction, the APPF, the Afghan tax issues, financial irregularities that have been well publicized. It makes it very difficult for congressmen and people in Congress to be able to support Afghanistan as strongly as perhaps they'd like to. Few are willing to stand up and publicly make the case. We also, of course, have seen NATO support dropping, and support among the NATO populations also has not been strong. So I have to say, unfortunately, we do need to expect accelerated U.S. military departures and less military support, less development support into the future. This is a reality. Our industry is still getting 5-year contracts. Ms. Ware actually pointed out that we actually have a lot of strong support in the immediate future. And that's great. I think President Obama has been very strong on this issue, but ultimately I think he's even going to have to face the reality that the popular support is waning. Success requires trust and partnerships, and I think that's more important than ever if we're going to try and get these things done quickly. And I guess I'll leave with that, and let me just talk a little bit about the ISOA Trade Association and maybe how we can help. ISOA is a trade association. We represent more than 50 companies from around the world that work in conflict and post-conflict and disaster relief operations. We do a lot of advocacy. We do work with Congress. We do try to improve policies for Afghanistan and other missions around the world. We are international in that we represent companies from a dozen different countries at least. We have an annual summit. Our annual summit this year is it's always in DC. It's always in October. This year it's October 15th to 17th. Everyone is welcome to the summit, members and non-members. We get over 300 people from industry, from government, from the public sector, from the military, coming together and basically discussing these policies and how we can do these kinds of missions better. We do a lot of specialized seminars. We look at specific policies. Last week we had a discussion with USAID on the APPF. We've had policies on training, on security sector reform, and we've examined those in depth. So we take a look at different things that our industry is doing, and we try to see how we can do it better. We have a magazine. I think some of you have already picked them up. We have extra copies over here. The Journal of International Peace Operations. These cover relevant topics to our industry. These are free magazines online. You can download them from anywhere. You'll find they have articles relevant to you. They're short and pithy, 1,500 words max. We're always looking for good articles on stability operations. And I think the exciting thing about the Journal of International Peace Operations, in a sense, is that it's coming to an end, because we are going to come out with a new magazine as of July, and I think you can look for that. I can't give any more details at this point, but it's going to be more industry focused and should be quite interesting. Finally, my last 43 seconds, I want to talk about a couple of the key issues that our industry are facing. One, the ethics issue. Again, the problem of the better companies constantly being undercut by cheaper companies that are less ethical. Two, the labor trafficking issue, a very hot topic in Congress. Anybody who's using local national employees or third country national employees especially, take a look at your labor trafficking laws and FAR regulations, because they're going to be going over those things with a fine-tooth comb, and this is something that's going to get a lot of publicity. Three, clarifying the Afghan tax issue. We've been working with the Afghan government on this. They have the realities that they need to be funded into the future. We have the realities that we need to make sure that when you put a proposal in, the costs are based on the actual taxes that you have to pay. And finally, the legislative risks. There's some significant legislation that could impact on policies that are ongoing in Afghanistan. Finally, I know we have a lot of ISOA member companies here, but we also have a lot of companies that are not members. If you are operating in the international spectrum and you are operating, I would say, beyond Afghanistan and other peace and stability operations in Haiti and Congo and Somalia, it may be worth looking at the association to see what we can do to support you. Jason Kennedy is our manager of membership and development, and he can help you in terms of making sure that you get into the membership. We are a standards-based association. We're based around a code of conduct. So there's a process to join, and we try to get the most professional companies under our umbrella. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. I'll look forward to questions at the end of